Hi, it's Luke. Today on Out of Darts, I'm going to show you how to modify the Nerf Rival Hera. This is a fantastic mag-fed blaster, one of the few blasters that feeds through the handle, which is pretty cool, and it's got a really nice feel to it. It's a really fun blaster to play with. Now, I have modded several of these, including a rather goofy one with a enormous side hopper, and I will do a video on this eventually, at least where that project went. And one of the big takeaways of this blaster is that it does require, ideally, a MOSFET. I've had at least a dozen people email me saying they followed another mod guide online that told you to just replace the 10 amp, or the switch in here with the 10 amp cherry, but those will universally burn out eventually, at least, after you use them for a while, especially if you experience a jam or something like that. So I'm going to run you through what the parts we're going to need, then we're going to take the blaster apart and get to modding. So you're obviously going to need your basic tools: soldering iron, solder, flux, helping hands, wire, snips, regular screwdriver, some sort of wire stripper or a hobby knife, probably a hobby knife in general. Always have your safety glasses, of course, an Xc60 connector for your battery connection, and a little bit of heat shrink would be good, and also some regular size heat shrink that's not currently pictured here. Now, one of the new products that is in this is a high-powered MOSFET board, and this is one that can throw... Now, the latest product that's included in this mod guide is one of my high-power MOSFET boards, and this thing will take anything you can throw at it and make the install much, much easier. MOSFET is simply a way of switching using low current wiring, and you can dig a lot deeper on that as far as education, but I'm going to leave it at that. So you have low current wiring like these for switching, these little jumpers, and these connect very easily to the board. So these will connect to your trigger and to an on-off switch if you'd like to have a master on-off switch for your blaster. And then all of the other components for the MOSFET are soldered on the board ready to go: the resistors, diode, and the MOSFET itself. Now, as I said, this one can take anything you can throw at it. This is sort of my high power MOSFET. I also have some other products coming out that may eventually be compatible here, but look on the site for the most accurate information. What this allows you to do is keep your stock switch, your stock trigger wiring, and just upgrade the motor wiring and the MOSFET itself, and then of course your battery. So we'll get into how to set this up later really, really easily. These are labeled battery plus minus, motor plus minus, and switches. One goes to your rev switch and one goes to an on-off switch, or you can bridge these wires and not have that at all. So let's get right to it. First, there's one screw on this side. We're going to go ahead and take that out. And we will take the battery tray out as well. We can say goodbye to this. Set your battery tray aside. Flip the blaster over and remove every single screw. I do recommend leaving your screws in place for this blaster because you can simply set the shell aside with the screws in it and never remove them or misplace them. Luckily, unlike the Nemesis, this blaster has all normal size screws and they are very easy to get out. You don't need to take as much care as you did with the Nemesis, and it really makes modding a lot easier. Thank you, Hasbro. After you've removed all of your screws, or at least loosened them rather, you can open this jam door and you should be able to pop the white left side of the shell off. Now, we don't need this again until the final assembly, so I'm simply going to set this out of frame. Next, we can remove this jam door that's just going to be in our way, so we'll set that aside, and we can take out the lower assembly here. I do like on this blaster just keep the screws intact because, again, we don't need this until the end. So unlike my normal rip everything out as fast as I can, I am going to think about this a little bit longer. There are two wires, a yellow and a purple. They are the only wires that we want to keep intact. And so I'm going to follow them all the way up here, one of the yellow ones go, and I'm going to clip that. And I'm going to keep that yellow wire intact, and I'm going to clip this orange so they can stay connected to your switch. After that, everything else can go. So we will I will leave this little micro switch there. You can take it out if you want, but it doesn't do anything after you've disconnected it. This little PCB, that's printed circuit board for those who have frequently asked. That can come out as well. That's a magazine detection lock so that you can't rev without a magazine in there, but we are going to bypass that completely. I'm gonna clip this extra stuff out of my way. Again, we're keeping the purple and the yellow, and now we're going to remove this top part. We're gonna get this whole assembly, just pops right out the top. You can leave the muzzle there. I find it a lot easier to just leave that in place, but it's not too bad. You do wanna watch. This happened right when I opened it up. This spring popped out. It is the trigger spring. It goes in this little indent there. You could put a little dab of glue down in there. A little hot glue would hold that in really well, and make sure that you don't lose it again. And the rest of these parts I just leave intact, including that switch. So we're just going to leave that. We're going to set this all aside. Now you do want to make sure that you are wearing safety glasses during all of this, and this is the essentially crucial to be wearing safety glasses here. You should have them on anytime you're soldering, but I like to clip these, as in my other videos, I like to clip the tops off of the main 4 terminals just a little bit, and the solder chunks will go flying. And the reason I do this is because it gets access past the glue. There's a glue that they put on the top of this that really makes it difficult to pull everything off. You can take these capacitors out as well, or you could resolder them back onto the main leads if you wanted. They're there to filter out RF noise. So they won't hurt anything for our builds whatsoever, but I'm not going to use them. So then we are going to want a little bit of solder. I did one of those last tutorial videos with the soldering iron in the total wrong setting, set in the lower temp. So today should be a lot easier. So we're just going to pop these boards out. These boards are not important after they are gone. It's just part of Hasbro's assembly process, and we want them out of our way. Now we are ready to solder our main battery leads, and for simplicity here, I'm going to mark these just so you can all understand what's what. That is my negative and positive, and then up here we have positive on the bottom and negative up top. And so you can see what we've got to do is we want the wires to come out this side just like they were in the stock performance, but we're going to go from negative to negative and from positive to positive. And it's a little confusing just with the way they are wired. So I'm going to start with positive to positive. So we're going to strip a piece of wire. This is where your helping hands will definitely come in handy. Now I like to give these wires a little twist and actually shove them physically through these holes. You won't necessarily get them perfectly in there, but you have a nice plastic buffer so you're not going to short anything out. And then we're just going to solder that in place. Now you notice on that one I didn't have, because I'm shoving it through a physical hole that holds it, I didn't have to use an actual, the helping hands yet. After that's cool, we're going to run this down. Now I cannot remember, because it has been a little while since I've done this, so we're going to find out together here. Basically, you need to get these wires through this little channel here, and you can actually cheat and put one in the channel where my screwdriver is and the next in there, despite the originals both going in there. So it's kind of up to you how you run them, but they essentially this needs to get run under. I'm going to try popping into this little thing, and hopefully this will save you the time of doing this or trying this. Now I will say right now I can tell there's a difference in this wire path from another one that I had. And you can see if you do this, you can see where you can't get in the way. There is a spot, you have to watch that clearance. It's important so that your wire can get through. But there's actually tons of room. So I'm going to leave those tabs intact, and I think I would recommend you do as well. On a previous one, I'm pretty sure I had to cut them. So I'm sort of mangling my wire there, but it'll be just fine. So probably would have been smart to have stripped that a little earlier. So I actually have two kinds of stripping tools, and the reason I do that is this one's really good at stripping when you're close to an object, but it's a small luxury of doing this a lot and figuring out the exact tool set you like to use. Oh, and then my wires popped back out. But anyway, we're going to tuck that in, and we are going to glue that in place later with hot glue, because I think hot glue is a very important tool on this specific mod. So in case you haven't seen me do this before, I realize I'm getting in the habit of glossing over things. I like to create a little split in this wire, and then after I've got a split in that wire, I'm going to put it on its actual terminal. And so that's about how we're going to end up running there, and then I can make that wire fit a little better after. But this is going to require, at least for me, I'm going to use helping hands on this guy. So we're going to hold that in place, and then we'll come back and we'll solder that in place. I often feel really awkward when doing these videos because of the setup, and I'm still working on that. And in the new space, we're going to set up an area dedicated to doing these, because it is my goal to get a tutorial video out for you all every single month. I want every 4 to 6 videos a month, and every once a month I want one of the ones to be a tutorial video, because I think they are the most value added as far as doing a nice clean job presenting them and whatnot. So I've tucked that wire somewhat back into its path. That is good to go. This lead will continue once we're in the body, but we'll leave it alone for now. Then we'll go ahead and grab our negative lead. And I really do, if you know the orientation, or someone's told you it, or you have a tutorial to follow, I really do recommend writing it down like this, because I can't tell you how many times I have sat there and modded, embarrassingly enough, like I modded a Zeus or something that I've done like 100 of them, and actually wired one backwards. It's red in the front, by the way, on the Zeus. Learned that lesson the hard way. So I'm just repeating the same thing here with the negative lead. And I like to just take my time with the soldering as much as possible, get it right, because if you don't, it's not going to be real fun later. Now I'm going to do my normal pass-through. We're just going to kind of hook that over, and then that's going to run back. Yeah, I'm just burning myself there. So do remember, stuff's hot. All right, so kind of, you can mark that with a Sharpie if you need to. I'll go back to my favorite wire cutters, or wire strippers rather. And this is the same thing again. I'm going to take a small screwdriver and just put a little bit of a slit. And the reason for doing this is you get a physical connection. Anytime you have a physical connection like this, you're not relying on the solder as any sort of physical, as the actual way to hold your wire in place. And then we're going to solder that in. I really like the Hera because it's kind of got a snappy, fun, you know, it's what I wanted the Zeus to be when the Zeus came out. And so it's fun having this, it's just very unique. And I am also very, very excited. And on the top of my mod guide list is the Perseus. Is it Perseus? It's got to be Perseus. I think that blaster is going to be stellar. All right, so we've got our leads here. And that is the first section of our wiring complete. All right, so once you bring your glue gun up to temperature, ooh, look at that mess. You're going to want to just put enough to hold this in place. Now that path actually has a lot more room than it looks like, so it's really forgiving, but you do not want these coming up and getting in the way of your magazine, of anything else, so I just put enough in there. Something like that for the black one will do. Oh, and I see my red wire has actually popped out of where I want it. I want it back in that channel just to minimize the risk. Now, yes, you probably could use 18 gauge and then the wires might tuck in a little more cleanly, but I tend to pretty much do 16 on everything these days unless it's a really lightweight build. The Rival motors do pull a pretty decent amount of current, but it's no more than the leading motors like a Kraken or a Fang or a Rhino. Try not to melt your trigger. So that should be good for that. Once that cools, we can actually put that whole assembly back inside our blaster. All right, so now that we've got this finished here, we're ready to put the blaster back together. First, you're going to want to kind of simultaneously set these pieces in. They're a little finicky. Kind of get the nose in. You'll see there's a little hook that top part sort of latches down onto. And then the whole cage assembly should line up just like that. There are little nubs inside there that are for vibration reduction. And then you're going to want to make sure that this tucks inside this little part right here. And just so you can see it on camera, if you're wondering which orientation it goes, the larger opening is at this end. Now that you can see where these wires are going to go into the battery compartment, we do need to make access here. Now you can do that on the back side of the shell here. So I'm going to actually flip this, and this is something I said I wasn't going to do earlier, but as far as making the screws fall out. But you can either clip or Dremel. I'm going to clip just because I've already got the clip in front of me, but you could Dremel a nice clean hole as well. And I'm going to bend this down. And then I'll just snip that off. And that'll serve as our access point there. And so then we can set that aside, keeping our screws back in place. And now we get to the fun part. This is our MOSFET, and I am going to wire it so it just sits in the battery tray because there's tons of room in the battery tray, and it's a little easier than cramming it into the side of the body, though it can probably fit somewhere in here. I just think it's easier to have it out here in the battery compartment. So it's very simple. You've got battery plus minus, motor plus minus. So we are going to start by, I'm actually going to give this just a little bit of hot glue there to keep that. So I've given that just a little bit of hot glue there to hold it in place, and I'm going to snip these off. Oh, about there will do, because I'm just going to put that MOSFET right in here. Now we can do the battery side of the MOSFET. So there's battery plus and minus. I'm going to go ahead and strip both. Just toss them through the hole and apply solder. Now you can solder from both the top or the bottom side. It doesn't matter, but you want to see flux going through the whole joint and the hole there. And the nice thing about these terminals is they are very forgiving as far as you got a nice big solder hole to deal with there. So even in this awkward setup, and I usually flip those around, just make sure I did not flux enough to get through the back side. So I'll go ahead and add a little bit to the back. This is your main battery coming into the blaster. All right. Once that is done, we're going to do the same thing back over here. Now we are attaching our motor leads. And it's exactly the same thing going on here. We're going to do positive to positive, negative to negative. I used to give these a little twist so they go through. And you can clip or touch any part of the board, especially like if you want to clip onto the edge of a PCB, you won't hurt anything doing so. All right. flux all the way through that hole, and I'm a little OCD, so I'm going to make sure they've got the best electrical contact there all the way through. You do want to be careful you're not touching any of the resistors or other components on the board with your soldering iron. Otherwise you could cause a failure. Now we just need to decide how long of an Xc60 lead. This will sit right in here like this, and I'll probably just do, a few inches. That's probably more than enough. If you hate soldering Xc60 connectors, I do now have leads that are pre-soldered from the factory, and they are just to make it easier to ultimately connect at the end. To keep reminding myself to look at the monitor and not just mod and talk. So we are ready to now do the Xc60 connectors. I'm going to slide a piece of heat shrink on both, positive and negative. Positive goes to the flat side. Flat side is always positive on an Xc60 connector, regardless of what your connector might be marked. I had a couple, not ones I carried, but I bought some cheap off-brand ones, and they had the wrong markings. And Eli watched me fry out a $30 speed controller. You can also pre-tin these and do these in, but I find that this works just fine. You just need to make sure that the cup gets entirely filled. You should see the air bubbles come back out. And eventually it'll stop taking any more solder into the, nearly there. All right. And if you do this right, you can slide your heat shrink right on at the end there, and you should have the residual heat connected just perfectly. This is the kind of stuff I don't know how you do without helping hands. It's definitely really, really, really useful. So we'll solder on the second side there. Probably got a little excess solder there, but we definitely filled the cup. Again, we'll slide our heat shrink down, and it will partially crimp itself on there. I do not have my heat gun in front of me, so I am going to use the side of the soldering iron to finish getting this to actually crimp on here. Do be careful not to burn yourself, but there's nothing wrong with this method. I frequently do it if I'm too lazy to dig out the tool from underneath. So after you've got the Xc60 done there, I really like to do a little custom cover kind of thing for it, just another piece of heat shrink that helps with a little bit of strain relief. And you just stretch a 1/2 inch piece of heat shrink like that, and then we'll melt that in place. And as I said, again, I do not have my, we're going to do this the bad way. This is definitely one that's better with an actual heat gun, or, well, I suppose I have a lighter somewhere. But generally I recommend a heat gun or a hairdryer can do the trick, but we can get there with this. And you know, hey, maybe not everybody has a heat gun lying around. It's not a totally crucial tool, so it's nice to have another option. Now we're going to complete the rest of the MOSFET wiring. You have a power switch and a rev fire switch. You do not need to use the power switch if you don't want to. If you decide you don't want to, just take one of these leads, clip it short, strip off the wires, and then twist those together. And then you could hit this with a piece of heat shrink if you liked. Say like that, and leave it like that. Or you could bridge the two terminals that are actually in here, but then you have to deal with trying to solder inside the connector. It's all the same thing, you're just bypassing that by by connecting it like that. So I'm going to go ahead and bypass it for this video. Now you certainly could put this to a nice switch, which is what I probably will do in the future. I'll probably put a switch maybe like down underneath here where I'll cut away, but for the basic tutorial, that's really all you need to know. Then we're going to take our second lead, and that's going to get wired to our switch. So we can plug that in as well. Make sure you support the back of these when you're actually pushing on them. So that's in, and then this can either get soldered. We can do one of two things. We can solder these two wires together, or I can solder to the switch. In some blasters, this will make more sense to just use these existing wires, but these didn't reach very far, so I felt in this case I'm actually going to go ahead and pull the switch out, snip the wires. So I'm sort of backtracking if that wasn't obvious from what I originally said, because I didn't do this whole mod recently. And so you're just going to wire to either of those two wires. It does not matter. I'm going to make the wires so they aren't too long, so I'll shorten them up a little bit. And it does not matter which of the two, which goes to which. You're just completing a circuit. And I'm not even going to remove this board. I'm just going to solder to the terminal and the board right there. Do want to make sure you reflux all of that existing solder there. You'll get the best connection. And so you notice we're using even a lower current wiring, lighter gauge wiring than was in there with the stock blaster. And that is because the MOSFET doesn't care what, it does not matter what gauge you use for the switching current. So I like to use, old wire, reuse stuff, or just use these jumpers whenever they reach. All right, and now we have completed our wiring. I'm just going to pop that switch back in there, which goes, I have to remind myself, where does it go? It goes with the lever pointing down when you're facing this orientation. And there goes that lovely, lovely trigger switch. You know what? Here's that thing I said earlier in the video. It's just put a small dab, not too much. You don't want to gum up your trigger, but now next time I open that, that's not going to pop out again, because that's just super annoying. I kind of hate retaliators for that sometimes. So there are little guides that this went through originally, and the main one is this little, it's kind of just a through, little through peak there. And I think I'm going to give it just a dab on the back side here of glue, just to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. This blaster is pretty forgiving, like all rival blasters. There's just a lot more, quite a bit more space. So this will go just up and follow the other wires, and then we will close up the blaster. Now that we've completed our wiring, before I close up the blaster, I always want to test. I do recommend at this point that you test at a lower voltage. I don't have a pack handy, and I am 100% confident that I did do this correctly, so I am going to test it with a ridiculously overpowered battery. So if something goes wrong, it's going to go really wrong. This is actually for the Proton pack. But there we go. We got a green light, and when we rev, so since we are good to go there, the next thing to check would be to just put a mag inside and make sure that that everything's lined up. Don't point this at yourself. And we are good to go. This thing does pack a punch on 3S, and it is a fun blaster just because it feels so different ergonomically than the rest of the rival blasters that are out. So now, making sure that our two springs are staying there, you can see I'm constantly battling them. I'm going to make sure there's enough slack there. Could have run that under, I suppose, but we're going to kind of work it through here. And I am going to put just a little bit of hot glue to hold that wire path in. And once that is cooled, we are good to go. So making sure that that's all clear of that, we're going to grab our grip first. And the grip is going to go right on here. You'll see there is a wire guide right here. Hopefully that's playing on video pretty well. That needs to grab your two wires as you set this shell down. And because if it doesn't, you may have problems with the wire routing hitting the trigger. And so you're going to want to make sure this is all locked up. Once you've got that, you should be able to, assuming the safety is off, you should be able to, why can I not? Oh, I didn't take the safety off. Yeah, or I didn't take the, so you do need to rev to be able to fire this blaster, and I did not tell you to remove that because you absolutely, absolutely should not remove the slide in here that's stopping this from firing when this is here, because if you don't, you'll put a ball into the seat of the two flywheels in between them, and that ball will sit there right when it revs, and you'll have instant jam and probably catastrophic failure when you start up. So then we can put our main shell on, and at the same time you're going to want to get your jam door back on. And then you're going to want to make sure that your wires inside here are going through that hole you cut. You could do a better job cleaning that up than I did, but for illustration purpose, I figured that was plenty. So you could run that MOSFET anywhere else you want in the blaster that you can fit it. It really doesn't matter. The only reason I put it here is it's a nice short run. It's easy access if I ever needed to access it for any reason. And there's plenty of room in this blaster for battery. Even with the MOSFET there, we could still fit this 5,000 milliamp hour pack, which would probably be like a week of playing or something. I mean, it's way overkill for this blaster in its current form. So then all that's left is to close up your blaster. Don't forget that you do have one screw on this back side as well. And at that point, now if you like, you can put a piece of foam or something in there. I generally grab like some packing foam or packing peanuts to wrap my battery. That way it doesn't rattle around. And that way you're not spending anything extra just to hold your battery in place. At that point, we have got a fully modded blaster. It's a very snappy, fun blaster. I really enjoy it. I think it does really well indoors, and I'm looking forward to playing with them a bit more. I did do a full auto build for this once, and I will have a new series coming on that about sort of what I'm going to call failed mods or something like that. Long story short, that mod worked, but not well enough to be a saleable product, which I would feel good selling to people because it was not reliable enough with the tiny amount of room I had to get the pusher motor in here. Just not enough power out of the tiny motor, but more on that later. Thanks for watching. I really want to make tutorial videos central to what I'm doing here, so I hope this was really beneficial and helpful. Let me know what I can do better. What are you not seeing? What details am I leaving out? It's really easy for me, as someone who's done a lot of blasters, to forget things. I will always try to do things in the safest manner and the most obvious manner, and explain as fully as possible without making these too long-winded. I'm trying to keep all these tutorial videos under an hour if possible. We will see how I did. Thanks for watching. I do plan to make these videos a monthly feature where every month you'll get a new tutorial video. I know that you've all been asking for them, and I've owed you a few for a while, so consider this starting to catch up here. What blaster would you like to see next? I am open to anything. High on my list are all of the new Rival blasters, and I still would like to get around to the Prometheus, but let me know what else I can do to improve the mod videos and what you would like to see in the next one. Until next time, I'm out of darts.